Today's episode has been brought to you by OfferingTree. I have to tell you, connected yoga teachers, I went to put together an offering that I'm putting out into the world very soon. I'll tell you about it later in today's episode. And I'm using OfferingTree, and oh my gosh, every time I go to use that software to schedule yoga classes that are online, it just makes life so much easier. I was so impressed by the waiver part of it, kind of like the liability waiver, that I could edit it and I could choose that everyone has to agree to the terms and conditions of that. I think that's super important when we're teaching online. And I also know that OfferingTree is starting to update the intake form also that they're going to add to things in September. So make sure to check them out if you haven't already. I just was so impressed today as I was setting this up because it helped make it so much simpler. You know, when you go to put an offer together and you're like, these are the dates, these are the times, this is the information, and you want to make sure it's all there. It's easy to do this on their website. I really was able to put it together in a quick and easy way. I'm really excited about how it came together as well. So if you're wanting to check out OfferingTree and you like discounts, head on over to offeringtree.com/Shannon, and we have a special discount there for our podcast listeners. Hello, and welcome to the Connected Yoga Teacher Podcast. I'm your host, Shannon Crow. I use she, her pronouns. And this podcast is being recorded on Anishinaabeg, Odawa, and Mississauga land, which was named by the settlers, the Bruce Peninsula in Ontario, Canada. Now, if you've been listening for a while, you know that I've been trying to do my own learning about yoga and the land I live on and colonization and how this all ties into social justice issues that are happening right now. And if you'd like to join me as I learn, I'm hearing from some of you who are listening to the same things that I'm listening to at the same time, which is really cool. This week, I'm listening to a podcast, which was created by Rachel Cairns. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, Rachel, who is a Toronto-based artist and creator. She has created this podcast where she shares her own abortion story, along with so much information and interviews and expert interviews. This podcast covers reproductive freedom and justice and rights here in Canada, but I'm telling you, no matter where you are in the world, it is worth listening to. For example, I learned on that podcast that before 1988, Canadians were relying heavily on U.S. healthcare professionals for abortion care. And I've also gained so many new perspectives through listening to this podcast. So definitely check it out. And I have to tell you as well, because I've been talking about it on the podcast, especially all last month, I feel like since the overturn of Roe versus Wade, it felt really heavy for me. As many of you know, I work with a lot of pelvic health professionals, and I was seeing the impact in medical care that was happening, especially in the US. And I didn't feel like this podcast added to the overwhelm. Instead, it feels like it gives me information and actionable steps. And that's what I needed right now. So let me know if you have a listen to this, or if you have a resource that you think, hey, Shannon, if you like that, listen to this next. I'm open to suggestions. And really, I'm open to any podcast suggestions or audiobook suggestions or books. I just love to learn, and so send them my way. Speaking of learning, I want to give a shout out to my oldest, Wyatt. His 24th birthday is this week, and I cannot believe that he's going to be 24. Like, that just sounds super old for me to have a child who's 24. I just remember when he was little, and I think back with such fondness on all of the adventures that we had. And I don't know about all of you connected yoga teachers, but I feel like the firstborn really has to kind of break the way for the rest of the kids. Or, for some parents, they decide to have one child. Well, I feel like I've said to Wyatt many times, I really didn't know what I was doing as a parent. Thank you for teaching me along the way. And it's amazing to see who Wyatt has grown into now as a young adult. He's a millwright mechanic. He's getting ready to go on a big adventure. Actually, by the time this podcast goes out, then he'll be going on a long trip across Canada with a friend of his, camping and touring Canada. And I love him so much. And I hope he has an amazing time. And I know that all of you, have heard about Wyatt over the years on the podcast because we've been hanging out here together for some of us for 5.5 years. So big shout out of love to Wyatt, who actually you'll hear on some of the earlier podcasts. I think all of the kids did an intro a long time ago. I should bring him back on here. Now, if you are new here, you might not know that I'm a mom of 3, a yoga teacher, podcaster, and founder of Pelvic Health Professionals. And also that this podcast really was created for you, the yoga teacher, so that each and every week, as you're busy doing all of the things that you're doing in life, it's here for you. We are here for you so that you can listen while you're on the go and connect to information, inspiration, ideas, so that as you build and grow this yoga business, you have the support that will help you along the way. And today's episode is one that I've been excited about for a long time to do the interview and also to share this information with you, because this is a question that comes up all the time in our Connected Yoga Teacher Facebook group, in yoga teacher trainings that I've been part of, in conversations with yoga teachers. Oftentimes, yoga teachers are asking, how can I do less demos in a class? And there are various reasons we might want to be doing that as yoga teachers. And Francesca Cervero is the person to talk to about this. And I'm really excited about all of the information that she shared with us. Like, why would we not want to do demos, or how does that help us as a yoga teacher? And how can we build this in starting with baby steps? If you have not met Francesca before, Francesca Cervero has been teaching yoga full-time since 2005. How cool. It's like we became yoga teachers around the same time, Francesca. I started my yoga teacher training in 2005, so very cool. And she trained at the Om Yoga Center, also spent time as a dancer, and subsequently spent time then in physical therapy. Now, Francesca's teaching is also influenced by her love of Buddhist teachings and a constant curiosity about anatomy and biomechanics. She offers private one-on-one yoga classes. She also mentors yoga teachers in the science of the private lesson and hosts the podcast, the Mentor Sessions, Support and Strategy for Yoga Teachers. And she's the founder of the adjoining community, the Mentor Sessions Sangha. Now, Connected Yoga Teachers, I don't know if you can hear this, but there is a really cool thunderstorm just starting to roll in here. So you might be able to hear that in the background. If you can't, then maybe you can imagine it. I can paint a bit of a picture here for you because I love thunderstorms. The leaves outside on the trees of my office are starting to move quite a bit, and there's just this rolling thunder. And it's been so hot here. So this is like new fresh air is coming in, and it's just going to cool things down. And oh my gosh, I love thunderstorms. If you don't, I hope that this isn't upsetting to hear about a storm rolling in. Okay, let's get back to this intro with Francesca. So in this episode, her and I discussed the benefits of why to teach without demos, or when to do that, and how we can start to do that, especially if you've never practiced this before. So Francesca talks about sitting on your hands while teaching and how to cue effectively. And if you're someone who relies on demos, because sometimes that's the way my brain works, I get it, Connected Yoga Teachers, you're going to love the tips in today's episode. And I also love how Francesca talked about the pushback, like when people say, well, my students are visual learners, or I'm teaching online, or what about accessibility and people who need demos? And so this conversation really went in some great directions, and I think you're going to learn a lot from it. And this is, again, one of those episodes where we just geek out on teaching techniques. So it really goes along well with the last 2 episodes as well. If you have not listened to episode 281 and 282, go back and have a listen to those as well after today's episode. I think you're going to love them if you like to geek out on all things teaching. Now, before we dive right in and meet Francesca and talk more about this, I also want to give a shout out to our sponsor, OfferingTree, and talk about and introduce you to an OfferingTree user. So sometimes I like to go and hang out in the OfferingTree Facebook group. Anyone can join in there. I love to see the questions that yoga teachers are asking about the software and also the help and the ideas and the links to websites. It's a really cool place to hang out. And also a very supportive community. So Rosemary Donnelly had posted something in there. Rosemary said, I've been using OfferingTree for about a month now, and I'd just like to share what a positive experience it's been. Having my website, scheduler, email, and the ability to offer digital products all in one program is amazing. OfferingTree may not have some of the bells and whistles of other programs, but sometimes simplicity is a gift. What I save in time and money is well worth the absence of a few high-end features. My clients are from an older demographic, but they have been able to use OfferingTree without issue. And this Facebook group is a great source of information and support. I'm so glad I decided to switch to OfferingTree. So when I saw this post by Rosemary Donnelly, I reached out to Rosemary and said, can I please share this on the podcast? It's a great testimonial. I want our connected yoga teachers to hear from other people who are using OfferingTree. And so Rosemary said yes. And I said, can we also link to your website because it's beautiful? And she also agreed to that. So thank you, Rosemary. And for our connected yoga teacher listeners, Rosemary Donnelly is the founder of Midlife Yoga and Wellness. We'll make sure to link to her in the show notes. And in case you're a midlife woman who's searching for a beginner-friendly, gentle yoga practice, make sure to check out her offerings as well on her website. Rosemary also tucked in a personal note where she said, today I listened to the podcast on self-care for caregivers. And she went on to say, it's wonderful. Your guest spoke from the heart and you did an amazing job interviewing her. I'll be checking out more episodes. So it's been so fun to connect with you, Rosemary. And I'm super excited that you then found the podcast. And I hope you're enjoying the day as you listen to this. Alrighty, let's get right into our episode today with Francesca. Welcome to the Connected Yoga Teacher Podcast, Francesca. It's so great to have you here today.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
I'm really excited that we get to talk about a topic that comes up all the time, and I can't believe we've never talked about it on the podcast with a full episode. How we as teachers learn how to teach without needing to do a demo or a demonstration. Before we do that, though, tell us what is the work that you do and who do you do it for?
So I teach these days about 15 private yoga sessions every week. I've been teaching since 2005, and private teaching has been, in some ways, the bulk of my teaching career. There were times when I taught 25 private lessons a week, but that was when that was all I was doing. And in 2012, I started teaching teachers as well. And so sort of pared down a little bit on my private sessions to make space for that. So I teach about 15 private sessions a week. I teach 2 group classes every week that I love very, very much. And then I do lots of work with teachers in various formats. So as you know, I have a podcast as well, the Mentor Sessions. We have an online membership community that's sort of the adjoining Sangha to that podcast called the Mentor Sessions Sangha. And I do occasionally still some one-on-one mentoring with teachers as well.
That's amazing. I feel like I've been following your work for a long time. Lots of yoga teachers have said that they have learned from you, and especially around private yoga sessions. And I'm wondering if that's when this topic came up. You know, if you're teaching 15 to 25 classes a week, you might not be doing all of the demoing. So what do you do in terms of demo versus no demo as you're teaching?
I do very little demonstration, generally speaking. And really, have always taught like that. I did my initial 200-hour yoga teacher training with Cindy Lee and Jennifer Brilliant at Om Yoga Center. And that was basically how we were taught to teach. We were taught to demonstrate when needed as a specific tool, when a visual would help someone understand an asana or a movement. But we were just not taught to teach. We were taught to teach with our words. I have to say, it's interesting because it's interesting to look back on friends and colleagues of mine who had the same training as me. And it's like we all sort of heard and took away slightly different things from those foundational teachings. And so even though we were all essentially taught to teach without demonstrating, I really took those teachings to heart, maybe in a slightly deeper way than some other people did. I think part of that is because very early on in my teaching career, I've been teaching for just about a year, when I had a really serious injury and hip injury, and I couldn't practice asana at all. I had to walk with a cane. I taught from sitting in a chair. So those lessons about the benefits for students and as well for myself of teaching without demonstrating really kind of seeped in to my teaching practice in those early years.
That's amazing. I mean, it's not amazing that you had an injury, but I feel like that is exactly when I learned, I cannot do all of these demos in front of this class today. That really changed things. So if there's a yoga teacher listening, they're like, yeah, but I think, people are visual learners, or this is just the way my brain works. What other benefits are there? So I feel like we've kind of touched on, when you're teaching a lot, you might not want to do those demonstrations. Also, if you ever have an injury, is there any other reason or benefit to us or to our students when we're not doing a demo while we teach?
I think there are so many benefits. Like you said, we already touched on the health of our bodies. It's obviously not sustainable to need to constantly use our body to share information about movement, either because if you're teaching a lot, that gets exhausting. If you're doing some things without being properly warmed up, that's not safe. I know there are teachers who do everything on the right side and nothing on the left side. That's not going to be great for your body in the long run. But it also, as we've also noted, is really, what do you do then? If you don't have the skills to teach with your words, what do you do when you get injured? Because you probably will get injured. The human body is beautifully resilient and strong and complex, and it breaks down. Everybody's does at some point in some way. And so if you're certainly like a career yoga teacher, it's very unlikely you're going to make it through 10, 15, 20 years of teaching without some kind of injury that prevents you from practicing asana in the way that you're used to. And you want to still be able to teach. So we've already touched on all that. There are so many benefits to students as well, I think. First of all, when we exclusively use our body to share information about movement, I think that it puts the emphasis or the focus on the aesthetic of the shape rather than the experience or the potential benefit, which will look radically different person to person. So I prefer teaching with my words because I think it places the emphasis for the student more on what they're experiencing as opposed to what their body looks like or what my body looks like. I also think that when we are demonstrating, then we are not able to watch our students. We're not able to witness. We're not able to support. We're not able to make changes in our cueing, in our sequencing, in the moment as quickly if we're not, observing them. So I think they get a more internally focused practice that is has an emphasis on the experience rather than the aesthetic. And they also get a teacher who's paying closer attention to them, which I really think is better.
I agree so much. You just reminded me of the very first class I ever taught publicly. Like I taught within my yoga teacher training and gained my confidence there. And I was very nervous to be in front of a group of people. And it felt really comfortable for me to sometimes close my eyes. And I think sometimes really translates into a lot of the time I was closing my eyes so that I wasn't looking at this group of people facing me. And you're right. I couldn't pay attention as much. I didn't see then how cues would land or how everyone was doing. And I think also it made the focus more on me. Like my students, I actually had a teacher come up and say to me, just relax. I know you're keeping your eyes closed to stay focused, but it would be great if you can practice opening your eyes. So that, what about when we feel nervous and our brain doesn't want to make it happen, either open our eyes, really focus on the people in front of us, or we're moving so that we remember, okay, right, my right hand goes here, my foot goes here. What are your tips around that?
Right. So you bring up several different issues, which I'll try to kind of like break apart into a few different pieces. So we talked about why I think it's better for us if we have the skills to teach without demonstrating. And that's not to say that we never do. I think using our body to show something can be a fantastic tool, can be very helpful for some students in particular. And I'm not opposed to it, and I do it sometimes. So this is by no means all black or white, so that's why I'm phrasing it this way. I think we need the skills to be able to teach without demonstrating. So that's better for us. Our students get a more focused, present, awake, aware teacher. That's better for them. But there are lots of reasons that teachers tend to demonstrate. And so you've already brought up one of them, which is feeling nervous. I think it's very vulnerable to be in a seat of teacher where we are kind of holding grounded space. We are speaking to some extent kind of constantly for an hour or more, and offering our students ideas, suggestions, cueing about how they might move. And I think that it's very vulnerable to be in that seat. And so a lot of people avoid the vulnerability or ground themselves with their own movement practice. So there's nothing wrong with that. But what I always suggest is that if you find that that's why you're doing that, and we can talk about this later, but here are some things you can do to move away from that. One thing that teachers do a lot is practice, they'll be demonstrating or doing poses where their students can't even see them, like child's pose or downward facing dog. So those are really good places if you've been practicing with your students to stop, put your knees on the floor, come up to sit, be still, and observe what you see in your students. But I think part of it is also just like, yes, it's vulnerable. Yes, you might feel nervous, but we have other tools besides asana to ground ourselves and to settle ourselves, right? We have an awareness of our breath. We have a lengthened exhale. We have grounding ourselves in presence, hearing the sounds in the room. Like we have tools that we can access to help us feel less nervous or to help us work with that nervous energy besides movement. And I encourage teachers to do that as much as they're able. In terms of like remembering the sequence, this takes practice. So here's the thing. I was taught to teach with my voice. Many teachers are not. And so it's a whole brand new skill that they have to learn. And it can take quite a long time. And I really encourage teachers to be very patient with themselves. When we used to do my teacher training in person, the science of the private lesson, One thing that we would often do, and I did this, I think, in my 200-hour training that I took as well, but is teach, pair up to practice teach and teach a 10, 15, 20-minute sequence to your partner sitting on your hands.
Oh my gosh, I love this so much.
If you've never done this before, it's a disaster. Okay? It's a hot mess. And that's fine. This is the only way. The only way out is through. Like the only way to gain the skills to teach without demonstrating is to practice them. So you have to start somewhere. It's great to do it with another teacher friend because they will be very forgiving. Although in some ways it's easier to teach a teacher because you can just say the name of a pose and they can just do it. What's ideal, if you've done that already, kind of gotten through that first round, is to take a very close friend, family member, partner, etc., who has very little experience with asana and do that with them. So that you're not just able to say the names of poses, but you're having to actually teach movements and shapes and body awareness. And you have to do it all with your words. Again, this can be kind of a hot mess at the beginning, but it does get better with practice. I mean, the only way you get better at using your voice and articulating what you would like for your students to try is to practice doing it.
These are so good. I hope our Connected Yoga Teacher listeners try this out. I also hope if you have a yoga teacher training, you build this in some way. My first 200-hour, I think I can't remember, so I don't want to say definitely it wasn't there, but I can't remember learning to teach just with my voice. And like you said, some of us learn kind of the tough way along the way. And I also want to highlight what you had said about when to do it. When your students are, in child's pose or lying on their back and they can't see you, that's where I started to build that up. And I would practice guiding with my words, maybe even like to myself at home without doing it. I would try and practice that. So that's great. We can gather with a friend, a yoga teacher, and then eventually take that into class. Is there anything else that helps us to build this muscle?
If we can record ourselves teaching and listen back to just the audio of the practice and then practice with it, I think we will start to see where there are holes in our cueing, where there's repetitive language. Because if you say something to a group of students, something you want them to do, and nobody does it, or half the people do it, and then you just say the exact same words again, that's obviously not going to fix it. That's not going to fix the problem. You need more different ways to say the same thing. So what you want to listen for when you record yourself teaching is how many times you're repeating yourself exactly, because that's not going to be that helpful. So what you have to do, and I've done this in teacher trainings that I've led as well, is like made lists of different ways that you can say the same thing. If you have someone in a low lunge with their right foot forward and their left foot back and their back knee is off the floor, and you want them to straighten their front knee, to a yoga teacher, especially someone who is very naturally embodied, you say like straighten your front knee. But people can interpret those kind of cues very differently. I've seen people scoot their front foot forward until their knee was straight, or like do something that to you might seem completely unrelated to the cue you've given. So here's an example. It's like, okay, you're in low lunge, right foot forward, left foot back. The left leg is straight, the knee is off the floor. You want them to straighten their front knee, like for a version of Parsvottanasana, right? Or pyramid pose. So you can say, straighten your front knee, start with the simplest. And if it's not having the response you want, then you say, keep both feet right where they are. Pull your pelvis back until the back of your right knee is straight. Okay, that didn't work. You try again. press the front big toe down into the floor and pull your right hip away from it until your leg is one long line without a bend in it. Those are just off the top of my head, but you can't repeat the same phrase over and over again because it didn't work the first time. So it's not going to work the second or the third time either. And this is what I mean. Teaching with your voice is a skill. So you can't expect to just turn it on or turn it off. You have to practice. So again, like I said, you practice teaching movement by sitting on your hands. It's very good for you. And then record yourself and just hear how much repetitive language you use and try to take your own class or have another friend take your own class with only the audio, without the video at all, and find out where there's some holes in your language cueing.
Now, what about when there's that awkward moment where, let's say you're teaching to a group that isn't used to this, or you're teaching to a new person one-on-one, and they just look at you expecting that demo because they do see it over and over again in different classes or online videos. Do you have some way of kind of putting their mind at ease when they just sit there and wait for you to do the movement?
Yeah, you have to tell them what you're doing and why. I mean, this is the thing. I see myself as a teacher. I am a teacher of asana. I'm a teacher of yoga, but that encompasses a lot. So you're not just like a fitness instructor moving people through an exercise routine, right? We have so much more to teach than that. So one of the things that I think that we are teaching is body awareness, how to connect language with a kinesthetic experience. So some pushback that I get on this is one, and you've mentioned this, so I want to address it, and then we'll circle back to your question. Well, people are visual learners and they need to see it. And I think that is definitely true. And there are some students who really benefit from a quick, short physical demonstration of something. But I am going to be honest, I think yoga teachers overuse that excuse. And because it's just, if you just assume everyone's a visual learner, then you don't have to learn this additional skill of teaching without using your body. And so I think for visual learners, it's very helpful to quickly show something. I don't think that ever requires a teacher to be on their mat for more than 60 seconds. Because in theory, it's one specific thing you're showing. But I think it can be very helpful to do that. Okay, so that's one thing. People are visual learners, but I think that we overuse that excuse. Also, what people will say, and this is a little bit what you're inferring, well, people are brand new beginners. They don't know the names of the poses. They don't know how to move their body. Yeah, we're going to teach them. And I think we can teach them better with language than we can with a visual cue. Again, because I think that puts the emphasis in the wrong place. So if you have a group of students who have never been taught like this before, then you'll just tell them, I mostly teach with my voice because I want to be able to pay attention to you. I want to be able to adjust what I'm saying if it's not working. So I won't be doing much up here. There's not much to see. So you just tell people that, and they get used to it pretty quickly. If you're a teacher who's in transition, or you have been teaching with your body, you're wanting to teach with your body slightly less, again, you should share that information with your students. Say, I know you're used to me being up on my mat up here the whole time. I'll still be doing that a little bit, but I'm wanting to pay better attention to you. And so I'm going to be up here a little bit less. If there are and we talked about this a bit already, but if there are sequences, movements that your students know really well, that are simple, don't do those with them. This happens a lot. It's like a Ardha Namaskar. You're standing at the top of the mat. Your students know this. You do this every week. You inhale your arms up to Ardha Hastasana. this is my sequence, so I'll share. This is the way I teach it because I don't love doing the big forward fold up and down a bunch of times. So we go like this. Inhale, arm sweep up to Urdhva Hastasana. Exhale, sit down into Utkatasana, chair pose. Take a big breath into the back of your lungs right here in chair. As you exhale, fold forward, Uttanasana, etc. Right? So if there's like a little minute of a sequence like that you do regularly, start there. Don't do that with your students. They don't need to see you do that. What will happen is and I've seen this happen with teachers in transition, is they'll do that sequence with their student, just kind of like gathering everybody together, getting themselves grounded. And then they'll start to walk away from their mat. And the students will kind of like follow with their eyes. They'll kind of like, they'll stop listening or they never were listening in the first place. And they'll just kind of follow you and stop doing what you're saying. So you want to be very clear. I'm going to be doing a little bit less demo today. When I'm up here on my mat, it's because I'm showing you something specific. But I might be over to the side of the room. I might be somewhere else so that I can see you well and watch you. And I won't be doing anything, so there's nothing to see. And you can say that if you feel like people are like looking up at you. One, that might be because they didn't understand what you said. So you have to say it differently. No problem there. Two, they might, be curious to see if you're doing something. So you can just say, nothing to see here. Keep teaching,
Oh my gosh, these are all so good. So good. What about, I catch myself sometimes doing this, like the part demo, and I know it's for my brain. If I'm like, reach your arm out this way, I end up doing that. I'm not doing the whole pose. I'm doing it for my brain because I know that you said, try this sitting on your hands. Any tips or ideas around that where we're sort of moving for our brain to put left and right and all the parts together?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you need to do a little bit of that, it's not a huge problem. I'm not so like strict about it in my thinking, generally speaking. I just like have taken this pretty clear stance. So it comes across as like very black and white, but I don't mean it to be quite that black and white. If you want to reach your right arm out, as you say, reach your right arm out, that's not hurting anybody. That's not hurting anybody at all. The only reason I'm suggesting, doing a practice teaching sitting on your hands is so that you get better at it if you're starting from scratch. But I do think if you're in transition and you're trying to teach your students to listen, because that's the other thing, like that I think is one of the things that we are teaching our students. We're teaching them how to listen, how to take language and turn it into movement, which is such a beautiful thing. So if you're really having to work on that, then I would try to do a little less of that, like reach your right arm out and reach your right arm out. But it's going to happen occasionally, and I don't think there's anything wrong with it. It's not that big a deal. I think in terms of like, a lot of people say, well, I don't know. If you can't teach your sequence without doing it, I think it's too complicated. I think maybe you just want to simplify, at least while you get used to teaching in this way. I think really simple sequences are so lovely. Nothing has to be fancy. So I think if you can't remember the sequence without doing it, I would just pare back a little bit. But another thing that teachers say is like, well, I don't know. It helps me give a cue about what to do or what this will feel like when I feel it in my own body. And I don't think that's a benefit because that you're teaching your body, and what it feels like to you or the cue that you might need to get more grounded in that shape could be the opposite of the cue that your student needs. And the only way you'll be able to cue your students is if you're watching them. So yes, for you, you might, as you go into this lunge, want to remind yourself to really press into the front big toe, et cetera, et cetera. And so when you're practicing, you're like, oh, this cue is so good. This helps me so much. But that's about you. And when we're teaching, we're trying to help our students. So to be able to cue your students effectively, you have to watch really closely and see what cues they need to feel grounded, to feel spacious, to feel agency about some other choices they might make. That's not something you can know feeling the movement in your own body.
I'm so glad you brought this up, because oftentimes students will also ask in a class, where should I feel this? And I'm so glad that you said that's your body and that doesn't mean that's someone else's. And you talked about earlier how this really allows our students to go inward and focus on what's happening in their body instead of living through your practice. And I think the other thing it highlights as well, what I hear you saying, is this is really about the students. And two parts to this, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. I think it's important, if we're going to do a flow or going to do a practice or share a pose, we try it out before the class. It's not like we're, using the cues as we're trying it out in the class. And that we're also really not using that time for our own practice. I do sometimes hear teachers saying, well, I got my yoga in today because I taught a class. I'd love to hear your thoughts on any of that.
I'm going to say a hard no on that. I really think there should just be a very clear difference between our teaching and our personal practice. Not that sometimes in preparing for it, or in out of my own practice, grows my preparation for my class. Of course, there's going to be tons of overlap, so it's not a problem. But I think if you feel like you got a full practice in, and I mean this with love, but you're not teaching. That's not teaching. Teaching is about relationship. And to be in relationship with your students, you have to be fully present with them and their experience.
Okay, one other really nitty-gritty question then. What about when we're teaching online and our students want to have their video off and we can't see them? What do we do then?
Oh my gosh. Okay, I know. I've been talking about this nonstop for 2 years. So I taught this way anyway. I taught without my body at all. My group class that I taught in person in DC before the pandemic, it was two, actually. It was 2 classes back to back. I was often in the back of the room, in the side of the room, or just kind of over in the corner where they could see me, but I wasn't doing anything. They were very, very used to having an internal experience, practicing to the sound of my voice, having lots of options and lots of choices about how they engaged in their practice that day. And I really think that made my transition to teaching online much more seamless. I already didn't touch my students. I had stopped doing that several years ago. My class was just too big, honestly, to be able to engage in dialogue with a student and get their full consent for the way I was using my hands on their body, the way I would want to, with a class of 40 people in not a huge space. So I had stopped touching my students years ago. So there was nothing that was so different about their experience taking my class online versus in person, besides getting to see each other, which they liked. So I have mentored and coached so many yoga teachers on this since March of 2020. I heard this nonstop. I just asked my students to turn their camera on. And if anybody didn't want to, it was never a problem. I don't shame anybody. I don't call anybody out. But I just started every single class in March, April, May, June, July of 2020 saying, thank you all so much for being here. I'm so glad you're here. If you're comfortable, I would love to see you. If you're comfortable turning your video on, that will help me so much to make sure this practice is working for you and to adjust myself, adjust my cueing, adjust my sequencing to better meet your needs. And I just started every class like that. And it really became, and I have since established an online boutique yoga studio. And that has really become the culture at our studio, where students will, and through 2020, through 2021, now people are kind of getting it, but people would come early to class to check their camera setup and to see how they could move around their space. Some people are just on their phones. Some people are in tight spaces. Sometimes the view is not great, but any view of them is, to me, better than nothing. And people would really want to spend 5-10 minutes with their teacher before or after class to adjust their camera so that we could see them well, because they so feel the benefit of our presence and attention. And I teach my online classes exactly the same way I taught my in-person classes, giving personal feedback, giving personal suggestions, saying people's names. The cueing or the personal suggestions that I offer are never like, so-and-so, you're doing this wrong, but like, oh, I love that variation you're doing. Maybe try it on your forearms next and see if you like that better. And people want, my students want those helpful suggestions. And so they really want to be seen. And I just really made it a huge focus of our transition to online. And it worked. That's all I can say. It worked really, really well. I know a lot of teachers teaching in environments where that's not the culture. And so there's only so much you can do. But I think if you can create a culture in your class where you explain the benefits of you being able to see your students, you be very flexible, about how much of them you can actually see. You make a point to offer support, suggestions, ideas, modifications, encouragement whenever you can, so people feel the actual benefit of turning their camera on. People will start to do it. Like I said, I've mentored a lot of yoga teachers through this in the last 2 years, and we've seen a lot of students realize, oh, if there's a reason, then they will turn their camera on. The other thing is, none of the other students are really looking up at the camera at my studio because there's nothing to see. I am sitting, literally, I teach sitting at my desk. I have a mat set up behind me that I never use. Maybe I used it a little bit more at the beginning, but as of this recording right now, I don't know if you know this, I'm 33 weeks pregnant.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Yeah. Thank you. Really trying hard not to run out of breath. Sit up tall, try not to compress my diaphragm. But so I've been, I was really sick in my first trimester. I was not demonstrating at all. Anyway, so I haven't demonstrated that much recently, but I have a mat back there, but I use it very rarely. And if I do use it, I'm like, hey, y'all, I really want to show you something. Take a second, come over to your camera. Let me show this to you. They can, and I'm like, does that make sense? Did that clear things up? And then people are like, yes, no, people unmute themselves. They ask questions, just like in person. Then they go back to their mat. But I think that people, for the most part at my studio, don't feel shy about having their practice or their space on camera, because literally no one is looking at it, because no one is looking at their computer, because it's just my face. There's nothing to see. And I think all of those things really contribute to a culture where students will turn their cameras on. If you're in a place where students do not turn their cameras on and you're teaching a bunch of black screens, I really feel for you. That sounds really hard. I know a lot of teachers who have done it, and it's not your fault. I'm sure you're doing the best you can. And I just think that that's hard. To me, it's not really teaching if you can't see your students. It's like giving a lecture. It's like recording a lecture. It's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. It's actually a pretty good way to communicate information sometimes. But to me, teaching, the real heart of teaching is in relationship. And if you can't see them, then that's not there.
Thank you so much for answering this. It's a question that comes up over and over again, along with the how do I work on this with my verbal cues instead of demos? How can our connected yoga teachers follow the work that you're doing? Where should they go to find you?
The podcast is a great place. It's the Mentor Sessions, Support and Strategy for Yoga Teachers with Francesca Cervero. And then the community that goes along with it, the Mentor Sessions Sangha, which you can find by going to yogateacher.com, are probably the two best places to find me these days. I will say, I want to just address two quick other things that didn't come up, but I think teachers are going to have questions about. One we touched on briefly is teaching beginners, brand new beginners. People tell me all the time, can't be done verbally. But I'm here to tell you it's not true. We have a level 1 class at my virtual studio, which is Stillness and Movement. You can find out more about the virtual classes we have at stillnessandmovement.com. And Hannah teaches our level 1. You have never met students who love their teacher more than those Tuesday night students love Hannah. She is so lovely. She's so graceful and clear in her teaching. And she definitely shows things occasionally, but for the most part, she teaches sitting at her desk like the rest of us do. And the students love it. So if you want to see what a beginner's class, asana class looks like with mostly verbal demonstration, Tuesday night, 5 p.m. Eastern, Stillness and Movement, take Hannah's class. It'll really inspire you, I think. The other thing that I want to just address is there are some situations in which this kind of teaching makes something less accessible. This is not the gold standard, most accessible way to teach for everybody all the time. If you're teaching a class of students where there's a language barrier, maybe you're teaching in English and most of your students have English as a second or third language, this might not work that well, and you might need to use your body more. And of course, that's what you should do. This also doesn't work with people who are hearing impaired. And so in that case, you might use your body more as well. And so again, this is not the only best way to teach by any means, but I think it's a very important skill to cultivate that I think we would all do well to work on, to get better at, and to have in our back pocket to use when it's appropriate. But I just wanted to say, because people always bring that up, and those are very good points. There are plenty of situations in which using your body is the best kind of teaching. And so I support that. I'm not opposed to that, but I'm here to help teachers cultivate the skill to teach with their words so they can use it when it's appropriate, which I think, barring those two accessibility issues, is most of the time. So again, you can find me on the podcast. You can find me the Mentor Sessions Sangha. And, I'm always looking forward to hearing from and connecting with other yoga teachers. So thank you so much for giving me this opportunity, Shannon.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much. I feel like our connected yoga teachers will be taking notes and they'll have ideas. I really appreciate the way that you take care of students, not just your own students, but you're helping yoga teachers take care of their students and also the yoga teacher community. So thank you so much for the work that you're doing. We'll make sure to put all of the links in the show notes. And I would encourage our connected yoga teachers to go have a listen to your podcast for sure and check out how they can learn from you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Oh my goodness, connected yoga teachers. I want to hear your thoughts and your questions after listening to this interview with Francesca. Thank you again, Francesca. I feel like this interview was so packed with all of the perspectives around demos. So thank you for bringing this really well-rounded, various points and tips and ideas to all of our listeners. One of my key takeaways in this episode is I love when Francesca talked about just telling students what we're doing. Let's say we've been doing demos all along and our students aren't really ready for it. Explaining what we're doing and why we're doing it, I think can make all the difference. And it really reminds me of this yoga class that I went to where I just felt like the teacher almost like, how when you get on an airplane, you're watching that same thing all over again. Like, okay, everyone, here's where the thing is in your pocket in the seat ahead of you. And here's where all the things are. And most people on that airplane, if you've ever flown on an airplane before, you're like, yeah, I know. And you just ignore the thing and it's coming. But if you're new there, oh my gosh, that's a lot of information. Do you remember back to your first flight or when things changed on a flight? I do. I used to do a lot of flying when I was younger, and I flew by myself. So maybe that's why in my brain there's a connection of comfort when people are going through the thing in an airplane. But I appreciate this in a yoga space as well, knowing like where the props are, where the washrooms are. Hey, here's what we're going to be doing today. Like you're the host and people know what they can expect. For me, that gives me a lot of comfort. So how cool would it be if we say to our students, you know what, I'm going to try this thing out because I feel like it'll give me more of a chance to look around at all of you or walk around. And so just explain to them if this is something brand new that you're doing. And let's keep this conversation going. If there are points that we missed in this episode, or if you have questions or thoughts, or you just want to really join the conversation, let's do that either in the show notes, so over at theconnectedyogateacher.com/283, or in our Facebook group. And let's keep the conversation going. And did you know that you can also leave me a voice message? I check these personally. I get some that are, specifically for me, just some thoughts on the podcast, and I love to hear those. And then I also get some voice messages where people want it shared on the podcast, and I always check and ask for permission for those. So if you leave me a voice message, let me know if it's to be shared on the podcast. It's fun to hear your voices. As a podcaster, this conversation can feel almost too one-sided. At times, here I am in my office talking away to my microphone, sending it out to you as you're out in the world. And I love to hear your voice. So send me a voice message. That's over at theconnectedyogateacher.com. The button is right there on the homepage. Don't worry if you're nervous. I'm always nervous. I get nervous when I talk to a new person on the street, or if I go somewhere. I feel like that's normal. Someone just wrote me an email today and they're like, oh my gosh, I've been listening to the podcast. I'm really afraid to send you this email. Don't be. Send me messages. I'm just a person over here. Also, if you want to hang out a little bit more, we have some cool stuff going on, mostly inside of pelvic health professionals right now. So August the 8th, which is coming right up, we have a call with Dr. Rose Schlaff, who's going to talk about desire and libido and all things pelvic health on that topic. Then Jill Mueller is going to be coming into the membership and talking all about endometriosis and pelvic health. I'm really excited for that September call because Jill is a pelvic health PT who has endometriosis and really understands this condition and is going to talk about how we can help those who have this and also educate us on what is endometriosis. And for some people, lots of people have this and don't know that they have it for a long time. So that's a call that I hope everyone learns a little bit more about endometriosis. And then on October, our guest speaker is Dr. Sarah Reardon, and Sarah is going to be talking with us about pelvic floor hypertension. So that's when the pelvic floor is holding maybe too much tension or holding a lot of tension. And then we're going to talk about how does that impact the body? How does that impact our pelvic health? What are some of the things that go wrong when the pelvic floor is holding all that tension? Also, I am teaching a 6-week series, Yoga for Pelvic Health, and all of our pelvic health professional members have access to that. So if you're thinking, ooh, I really want to check out the membership and learn more about the pelvis, the anatomy of the pelvis, the pelvic floor, how all things work around the pelvis. This is an area of the body that gets skipped over way too often in yoga teacher trainings and anatomy trainings in life. And so that's what we focus on. So you can join the membership and have access to everything in there. And as I was saying, I'm teaching this 6-week series. So you could do it on its own. But believe me, connected yoga teachers, honestly, sign up for the membership. You save yourself a little bit of money because my 6-week series is $120. But it's included in the membership. So it just makes sense to sign up for the membership. join that way, get access, check it out, check everything out in the membership. And I'm really excited about this 6-week series. It's been a long time since I've taught yoga. It was when COVID hit, my classes at the physio office stopped. I stopped teaching in person. I've taught a little bit online, but as I was creating the outline for this 6-week series, I just got that real excitement, like, oh wow, this is going to be really packed with some great information. And it's for all genders. So many of you know that I've been taking out my gendered language from pelvic health whenever I can. We definitely will be talking about uterus health in this. We're going to be talking about bowel health. Don't worry, if you don't have a uterus, it's still really cool to learn about uterus health. I hope all people learn about it. Bladder health, bowel health, pelvic pain, breath. Oh my gosh, I feel like I'm missing one of the 6-week topics. But check it out. I'll make sure to link to that in our show notes. Thank you to those of you who reached out and said, I heard you talk about this. Where's the link? We'll get it in the show notes for this week's podcast episode. So yeah, that is how we can learn together, connect a little bit more, practice yoga together. And also inside of Pelvic Health Professionals, we have a monthly Q&A call. So that is where we really help our members to grow and simplify their business. So bring all of your business questions to those calls. We do those once a month. All of that, Connected Yoga Teachers, is over at pelvichealthprofessionals.com. I also want to say thank you to our audio engineer, Suzanne, our traveling writer, Crunch, and our community support manager, Sinead. These 3 amazing beings make life so much easier over here. They bring the podcast to you each and every week, and they're also doing fantastic work out in the world. And if you want to get to know them a little bit more, you can head on over to our Connected Yoga Teacher website and look at the About Team page, and you can even find out, hey, can I work with these amazing people as well? I also want to thank you for being here all the way to the end of today's episode. It means a lot that you've hung out here today, listening into this conversation, learning about how to, maybe take some of the demo time out of your yoga classes, learning about why we would do that, meeting Francesca. It's just been really great that you're here today. Thank you for being here. And I'm also curious, what will you be doing this week to stay connected to yourself, your yoga practice, and to your community so that you can share the yoga that lights you up?